Hello, everybody. I'm a kangaroo. I'm kangarooing from Germany. Freiburg is the city. It's near the Swiss border. I'm here with Nathaniel, who is also a polar bear, who is also an Israeli. He is also a Frenchman and a United States citizen, and he is coming to us live from Haifa. Is that correct?
Yep, Haifa, Israel.
And which is in the north, which is the Golan Heights. Now, who controls the Golan Heights right now?
Israel. It's actually not on the Golan Heights, but it's very close.
Hmm.
It's on the sea. I have a very nice view of the bay here, actually.
Is there good skiing in the Golan Heights?
There's skiing, but having lived in the Alps and in Vermont, I wouldn't say it's good skiing. It's just skiing. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I have a list of questions here. Some of them are, I would say, somewhat uh, basic. Like, I want to go over some basics and hear it from somebody who knows their shit. Um, because I don't know everything I would like to know. And so some of the questions might border on stuff that you wouldn't think that somebody would ask. So I hope you can bear with me on some of these questions, but I am actually really quite interested in hearing what your answers are.
Sure.
Okay, so let me start by saying people talk about the occupation all the time. They say Israel is occupying Palestine.
Right.
What are they specifically referring to, and why do they use the word occupation?
All right. Well, um, if you talk to a Palestinian or a Palestinian supporter, when they refer to the occupation, they'll refer to Gaza as being occupied, even though Israel completely pulled out in 2005, because there's a blockade, etc. Israel does let in a ton of humanitarian stuff, but to them this means it's occupied. Uh, Now in the West Bank, it's a different kind of occupation. There are enclaves of settlements that have soldiers around them, soldiers guarding them, and there are checkpoints with soldiers around the West Bank. So going from town to town as a Palestinian, you will have to go through checkpoints
Hmm.
typically. Um, Now, the occupation started in 1967 after the 67 victory. Israel took the West Bank, it took Gaza, it also took Sinai.
Hmm.
Um, and it's been a thorn in the side of Israel ever since. Interestingly enough, it's also the point at which Israel turns from a left-wing supported country to a right-wing supported country.
Hmm.
That's the beginning of it, because people, you have to go back a ways, but people really don't understand. They know almost nothing about Israel. They keep thinking it's a fight about, whose God is better, etc., which is not the case.
Hmm.
Israel was started as a secular state, and it was really founded by communists. The original Zionists were diehard communists in most cases.
Kibbutz.
Yeah, atheists and
Mm.
left wingers. There's a wonderful book I always mention, also a wonderful movie that was made, I think, in 1980 called The Chosen by Chaim Potok, which is kind of a true story of Chaim Potok's early life.
Mhm.
And it talks about he's a kid living in Brooklyn, and his father is a left-wing columnist for a newspaper in New York, and he is extremely supportive of the Jewish state. This is before the state of Israel is born. Their activism helped the state be born, and he befriends a very ultra orthodox kid his age, whose father is a rabbi who's against it. So it tells a story really that the early state of Israel really was supported and founded by atheists
Oh,
and secularists, and the religious saw it as a blasphemy.
okay. So let me then, when you're talking Gaza, you mentioned the wall and the pullout. So is one of the main problems here just proximity, just claustrophobia? Like there is no buffer zone. So when they pulled out literally behind a wall, and it's like they're in very close range to each other. Is that?
Yeah, well, in Gaza, it's different. There is a wall that literally surrounds Gaza. In the West Bank, it's different. It's mostly fencing, but there are parts with walls. This was relatively new. It started with the Second Intifada, in 2000 because of all the suicide bombings on the buses and cafes, etc. People, were motivated. My brother included, helped in that campaign. He lived here at that time. I didn't. They wanted to build a wall to basically make it a lot harder to cross over and blow people up, which this wall didn't exist before. And like I said, in most places, it's just a fence. But whether it's a wall or a fence doesn't make a difference. It's a separation.
But but is there a no man's land? I mean,
No.
is it like it was in North Korea or in East
Yeah,
and West Germany?
no. There's no man's land. If you are approaching any part, there are parts like if you drive from Jerusalem down to Eilat. I hear like a military helicopter.
Yeah, it's a hospital nearby.
Oh, okay.
You're on the inside.
That's all right.
So
It sounds like you're on an airbase. So if you're driving from Jerusalem to Eilat, you actually have to cross. In most cases, you have to cross into the West Bank in the desert. Part of the West Bank is in the desert, and you'll go through a checkpoint, and there'll be warnings that say you're entering, the West Bank, etc. There'll be warnings on the side of the road. If you approach like places in the West Bank that from Israel going to the West Bank that go to like Jericho, etc., there'll be big warning signs saying you're not allowed to go on this road unless you have special access, etc. So.
mhm. So then when they talk about the occupation in today's context, I mean, they're not talking about the Sinai, obviously, and they're not talking about Gaza per se, or they're talking about the West Bank primarily.
Well, no, they are talking about Gaza. They include Gaza in the occupation because it is, well, frankly, it's literally surrounded. I accept that. I mean, that's just the truth. But Israel ships in, like I said, tons and tons of stuff every day.
But how could it not be surrounded? I mean, those are the borders that go back for years and years.
Yeah, but I mean, they also Israel blockades the coastline.
Okay, so let me ask you, when did that start and why did that start?
That started after 2005.
Oh, that's recent. Okay.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, it built up from the second Intifada to 2005 when the Israelis did a pullout. After the pullout, they basically got a lot of rockets from Hamas instantly. So they decided to blockade the coastline to prevent shipping of more rockets, etc.
So this was done as a wartime measure, but
Absolutely, yeah.
but it's continued to this very day.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the humanitarian aid been to Gaza themselves, or do they monitor ships coming in, or how does it work?
Actually, the humanitarian aid to Gaza comes in from the land, from Israel's side, and it's actually the Israel Defense Forces that trucks it in a couple of times a week. In fact, I know somebody who does that as his job.
Wow. Okay.
So they literally truck in this convoy of trucks a couple of times a week to provide water, food, necessities, etc., but other things as well, medical things, etc. There are some things that they don't allow. They apparently have talked about releasing. They have released a few things. Like they didn't allow cement because they knew that was being built used to build tunnels, which was a major issue during the last Gaza war. So Palestinians seized on that and said, they're not even allowing us cement to build, etc. I believe they lifted that restriction. I'm not sure. I'm not up on all the specifics, but the people who criticized Israel the most for these restrictions was actually Egypt. Al-Sisi is fighting is even far more brutal against the Hamas, absolutely loathes the Hamas. He's fighting a war against them, and he's doing things that Israel could never think of doing to fight Hamas on the Egyptian side. So it's a real mess, really.
Wait, what is the issue between Hamas and Egypt? What's the feud?
Well, Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in a sense. They have very, very close ties, and the Muslim Brotherhood won the election after the Arab Spring in Egypt.
Hmm.
And you know, a little after a year later, al-Sisi overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood with popular support, and jailed them all. Jailed the President Morsi, who's Muslim Brotherhood, etc., and has essentially launched a jihad of their own against fundamentalists. So Sisi, while he is a dictator, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I'm not exactly enthused that he's kind of a figurehead for this thing, but he made a very important speech in January 1st, a tremendously important speech about how the Muslim nations should reform Islam, that they should do away with these interpretations about being at war with everybody who isn't
Hmm.
Muslim, and how they should behead people, etc. And he went to Al-Azhar University, which is the seat of really intellectual Islam in the entire Arab world since over 1,000 years. And he made this speech in public at Al-Azhar and was roundly criticized for it by most Arabs, but you know, he essentially said we need to modernize our religion.
But isn't this shocking though? Because I thought Egypt was one of the most anti-Semitic
It is,
people on the planet. Like the polls
yeah,
showed that the civilians there are, hate. They don't like Israel at all.
yeah, they don't, and but the fact is that the military in Egypt have always been very secular,
Hmm.
even during. See, it goes back to Gamal Abdel Nasser's days when Nasser was essentially a communist in a
Hmm.
sense, but there was this thing called Arabism, which didn't really necessarily refer to religion. This was a 60s and 70s thing. This is actually where many of Arafat's ideas came from, and ideology comes from. These guys were actually a lot more secular than anything we can imagine in the Arab world today. And so the military was very secular overall. The people weren't, but the ideology driving the state was.
Okay.
And Sisi comes from that background, so he realizes that, you know, there is no compromising with these fundamentalists. He's fighting a war against ISIS. He's fighting a war against Hamas and
Okay.
the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, all three share a common trait: fundamentalist Islam. He is
Hmm.
not, his worst enemy at this point is not Israel. He knows Israel isn't going to come in and try to take Sinai away from him. It's not
Right.
a concern. His friend next door would be Israel. I mean, that's really the thing that's going on right now in Egypt. So.
Interesting. So, is it true though that Hamas is getting rockets and arms from the south, from tunnels through to Egypt?
Yes, what Egypt did a few months ago, which got almost no play in the international press, but when Israel did this, it was considered heresy, blasphemy, etc. But Egypt basically dynamited, I believe, half a kilometer swathe on the Egyptian side of the Gaza border,
Hmm.
and blew out the entire underground area of that huge trench to collapse all the tunnels, dynamited houses, relocated people forcibly, etc. Got absolutely. I mean, can you imagine if Israel had done something like this? Um, and it got absolutely no play in the media, but in Israel it was huge news because, you know, it was like, this is hypocrisy, because you know, almost nobody was saying anything about it, but when Israel you know, blows up one house, it's the end of the world.
Right.
Um,
Of
but
course.
yeah, I mean, so he's really he's trying to cut them off completely. He's trying to cut off Hamas completely. Uh, People still make it over the border. Things still get you know, smuggled over the border, etc. But it's just a lot harder now from the Egyptian side.
What would what do you suspect the approval rating of Hamas is within the Palestinian territories?
Oh, I think it's almost overwhelming. And I don't. The problem is, I don't think it was almost overwhelming until after they took over. I mean, it was definitely majority, but not as big as it is now.
Yeah, like what did they win the election by? What were those numbers like?
I forget what it was. I think it was 55%. I'm not sure. I
Okay.
mean, I could be vastly wrong on this subject, but
Okay.
it was 10 years ago, so I don't even remember. They did win the election. There's no doubt about that. I mean, that was, it was actually observed by Western states, et cetera, and judged to be absolutely legitimate. The outcome was legitimate. It's just what happened afterwards.
It's the first and last election ever.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. And it's not. It's only, when they threw out the Palestinian Authority, they literally threw them. They were throwing people off rooftops. There's video of people getting thrown off rooftops in
So,
2005.
so they killed the competition essentially.
Yeah, absolutely obliterated them. I mean, they killed people who had nothing to do with the They killed they killed the like Arafat's cook or something who was just, yeah, they threw him off the building. I mean, this poor guy was just, cook. And
but this is essentially what the Nazis did to take power.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, let me switch it up a little bit here. I'm just curious to know your personal take when you hear the expression Allahu Akbar.
Well,
But just theoretically, what is it? How do you feel about that? And then two, what if you hear it audibly while walking down the street?
Well, if I hear it walking down the street, I know I'm in trouble. Yeah.
I mean, are those your two least favorite words? I mean, I just can't imagine how horrific that would be to hear that.
I don't know if I have. I mean, yeah, in a sense, I suppose, but I'm going to get in trouble. I mean, I really loathe Islam as an ideology, etc. And I've talked about this many times before, but Islam to me is completely abhorrent. You can take away the beheadings, you can take away the child molestation of Muhammad, take away the oppression of women, and all of that. Imagine that it has none of that. But it still has the doctrine of you're going to have to follow us or be damned to hell. I think that this is frankly one of the most abhorrent things you can say to a person.
Well, you're preaching to the atheist choir on that one.
Yeah. So
yeah.
when people call me an Islamophobe or something, I'm like, no, I'm not phobic of Islam. I just absolutely loathe it.
So do you long for the day where Israel would be surrounded by Mormons?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, if it was Mormons, I mean, I have no love for Mormons either, believe me. But, I mean, when was the last time they went? I mean, okay, in the 1880s or something, they, Smith, or it's 1860, Smith tried to raise an army, etc., had an army. Oh. But that's long gone now. I mean, that's a century and a half now. It's not a concern in today's world. What do Mormons do today to try to conquer the world? They send people to bother you during your dinner. I mean, how annoying is that?
Exactly. It is amazing, and I've spoken out against Islam quite a bit recently. Now let me ask you this, just for the record. I mean, I'm fully aware of the answer, but what is the punishment for leaving Judaism?
Well, there is none, and technically you can't really leave Judaism because it's a tribal thing. So you're born a Jew, you're going to be a Jew regardless of whether you believe in God or not. They'll still consider you a Jew, but there's no penalty for it. There's no nobody's going to stone you to death, etc. I mean,
right.
In fact, unless you belong to an ultra Orthodox community, they're not going to shun you or anything. I mean, fact is, most Jews are atheist or agnostic per capita. I think it's the biggest number per capita out of any religious group. So,
but would there be some like social ostracism or shunning, like if a Jew sort of married a Christian, let's say?
No, actually, Judaism is a fast disappearing religion because it is intermarrying like crazy, and it's just in fact they're considering ways into how to include non-Jews that are married to Jews into being considered Jews now, because it's such a big concern that they might vanish in the next century. So they're not they don't shun people, etc. For it. I think they'd be more than welcoming to people at this point.
And as far as the Orthodox, what percentage of Israel is Orthodox? the hardcores?
It's actually, I don't know the answer to that, but it is a minority. The problem is it's actually a growing minority because they have far more children. As you know, secular people have far less children than religious people. It's a growing minority, and they are definitely flexing their muscles every now and then. But there is a large backlash. I really don't know the percentage because
So I'm curious to know, like, what if you're walking down the street and you see an Orthodox guy with the getup and the hair and the hat and all of it? What is your thought? I mean, do you view these people in a different light? I mean, how do you interpret that?
I kind of do. Look, I have friends who are Orthodox, and they know my views. They don't, they're not insulted by them or anything. It's not like I have to hide my atheism in this country. I'm perfectly comfortable talking about it. But my view is it's really just idiotic, especially in the middle of summer. These guys are, with these long black coats and black hats. I mean, and it's so, you know. I mean, it's kind of like as if I would walk down the street wearing a pirate costume or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it no longer applies in modern society. I understand where they're coming from. I understand the reasons why they do this. They're really into tradition, and it represents the school of thought they happen to be part of. Some of them dress differently from others. I think, yeah, frankly, I think mostly it's just idiotic.
So within that community, do they tend to be any more violent than anybody else? Do they tend to be more hawkish with their
No,
attitudes? No.
no, for the most part. I mean, it depends. They've had some protests here in Israel, depending on the community, where they have launched, like, thrown rocks, etc. But most of them don't do that.
Yeah, there's a good question. Why are there so many goddamn rocks in Israel? Where are
Yeah,
these Palestinians getting these rocks from?
yeah, it's people. If people think it's like a sandy desert here, it's not at all. Actually, we have a very small area of the Negev desert, which is a sandy area with dunes, etc. It's a very small area.
But the rocks they're throwing, is it rubble from like buildings, or where do they get these things?
Yeah, basically, yeah, essentially it's or rocks on the ground. It's actually a rocky terrain in most
Okay.
respects in Israel. It depends where you are, but for the most part, you're talking about a fairly rocky terrain.
Okay, now let me radically switch gears here and break off one of my favorite topics, which is Eurovision.
Sure.
I find it very fun and amusing that
Hmm.
Israel is included in a European song contest.
Yeah.
Um, does Israel want to be a part of Europe?
Yes. And by the way, I told you that I don't watch Eurovision last time we spoke. But it's kind of funny because when I was living in Belgium when I was a kid in 1976, I think it was, or 77,
Mhm.
Israel won the Eurovision contest with a song called Hallelujah, which was very, very popular at the time, etc.
Right.
And I remember really loving this song, etc. I was like really into it at that time,
Mhm.
or so it seemed to a 6-year-old or 7-year-old. But Israel, in a sense, is in like Tel Aviv, which you have to understand is about half the country. So
Mhm.
most people will say like Tel Aviv is Israel.
It,
It's very European in a sense. Yeah.
okay, so is Tel Aviv any more safe than the other places because it's sort of insulated from the danger spots, or is it just as?
Actually, yeah. Well, it's not. Israel's not unsafe. I mean, it's just that where you get rockets is in the south near where Gaza is. The thing about this latest war was Tel Aviv was finally hit by a hell of a lot of rockets, which is the first time that that's happened since Hamas started throwing rockets,
Mhm.
and that was actually talked about a hell of a lot in the newspapers because it was an absolute shock to people in Tel Aviv. They had never really considered that to be like a part of their daily lives as a possibility, a part of their daily lives.
So maybe you could break down a little explanation of this Sky Dome, or what is it called?
Iron Dome, yeah.
Iron Dome. So like this is like what Ronald Reagan was talking about with the Star Wars defense system back in the 80s. Like how
Yeah.
effective is this thing, and when was it put in place?
It's exceedingly well effective. I actually used to work for an Israeli company that helped to build it.
Hmm.
But this was back in the early 90s, and I was living in New York at the time. I was working for the New York division. And it came out of the Star Wars program, but it actually came out of the Patriot program, which came out of the Star Wars program.
Mm.
And the Iron Dome system is a lot different than the Patriot system in that it categorizes areas. From what I understand, I'm not like I'm not an Iron Dome battery expert or something, but they categorize like areas which missile is predicted to fall into. So if it's a deserted area, they're not actually going to try to stop it. And this is all done by computer. I mean, they have people who analyze it, et cetera, who are there and who monitor this and activate it. But so essentially, if it detects something's going to hit like farmland, like, it's not going to like waste ammo trying to get it. If it's going to, anything outside of that is going to try to stop.
Right.
It's really effective.
I remember in the first Gulf War, Iraq had all these Scud missiles, and they launched these things up, but they were kind of stupid. They didn't really have the best aiming systems, and we had the Patriot defense, and I thought it was super cool until I found out that like each time we fired off a Patriot missile, it was like $1 billion or something.
Yeah,
It's like,
the Iron Dome uses a lot smaller clusters of missiles, I think. So essentially, it's rockets, but not like this one Patriot at a time type of thing.
And so, how intelligent are the rockets being fired? Like, how much steering can Hamas do with these things, or is it just sort of?
Oh, the rockets that Hamas fires are dumb rockets.
So this is essentially like catapults and like the old Roman times or some shit. Just
I think that the Syrian missile, the Farj or something like that, it might not be dumb, but I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on military hardware. It's just from what I read. But almost exclusively they're dumb missiles. They just aim them in a general direction and they fire.
But they have a pretty good lock on the trajectory, and I mean they're going to hit their target somewhat, just not pinpoint.
Yeah, I mean, if you aim something at Tel Aviv, you're probably going to hit something in Tel Aviv. Okay. I mean, given gusts of wind, etc., they're not exactly smart rockets. But like barrel bombs are dumb weapons. Okay, the barrel bombs that they're using in Syria have absolutely no guidance to them in any way whatsoever. It's just a canister filled with dynamite and gasoline with a detonator on the bottom and fins on the side to stabilize. They literally just roll them out of helicopters, and they're still killing tens of thousands of people. You don't have to have a smart weapon system. So a dumb rocket will kill you just as easily as a smart rocket, as long as it lands near you where it can do that. So
Here's an odd question I just thought of. Are there fireworks in Israel, or is that not considered kosher?
No. We just had fireworks for Independence Day actually here over the bay in Haifa. It was very nice.
That doesn't freak out the populace?
No, we were all looking forward to it. I was sitting out on my balcony waiting for them to go off. We were all just taking pictures and stuff. It's really cool, actually.
That's not going to put the Iron Dome on a fritz and be like,
no. They move batteries in according to threat levels. So a few months ago, there was some serious problems on the border with ISIS, etc., and Hezbollah, and it was reported that they had just moved in a couple of extra batteries at the port of Haifa, which is what I overlook here. Okay. So they'll move batteries around as needed.
So is it safe to say that I'm hearing an echo here?
Oh,
is that me?
I don't know. Might be me.
All right. Do a double check on that. So is it safe to say that the computer age has changed the way that Israel defends itself, and because they are so tech savvy and have a head start sort of in this field, that it's a totally different ballgame? Like, I mean, if you told the guys back in '67 about the Iron Dome, they would lose their mind, yeah?
Yeah, it's completely changed the playing field, frankly. As we saw in the war, you have to remember that Israel fought a war in 2006 for which I wasn't here, but Haifa got pounded.
Mm-hmm.
It was so bad that people were living in bomb shelters all month long, and actually they had to send up like relief packages for food, etc. So it was.
Who was attacking on that one? That
That
was
was Hezbollah from
okay.
from Lebanon.
Yeah.
So it was they could have used that back then, but it didn't exist yet. I mean, it wasn't. They were working on it, but wasn't ready at all.
It's actually hard to keep track of all the enemies of Israel. But in your estimation, who is the bigger threat, Hezbollah or Hamas?
It's hard to say because first of all, they're really the same kind of organization. I mean, I know people say they're not, and they disagree, etc. But they are. They're Iranian-backed terrorist organizations. They're both heavily Iranian-backed. They both get their weapons from Iran. They both get their funding from Iran. They both get training from Iran, etc.
Wait a minute. I've never even asked this to myself. Hamas is Shia?
Well, they're Sunni, but they're backed by Iran.
So they have a common goal to get rid of
Yeah,
the Jews. Is that?
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. I know. It really is crazy.
So that's why Hezbollah and Hamas do not have joint meetings and sort of. I mean, they do have major differences.
No, I don't know. They pretty much have no differences. They don't. If they do, they don't. It's not really an issue.
But Hezbollah is Shia.
I know. But this is not something that they dispute over in any way. Should Israel ever fall, then yeah, you would see that.
Ah,
But
I see.
that's not going to happen anytime soon. And it's never been an issue for them in terms of infighting, etc. As far as I know, I mean, I'm not an intelligence expert, but you never hear about it.
Okay, so it's a bit like Russia and the United States during World War II. We both wanted the Nazis out, and then after they were out, we immediately went against each other.
Yeah, I'm sure that if Israel ever fell, they would be at each other's throats. And I think that Hezbollah would crush them in that case. But in terms of direct threat, I got to be honest, neither of them are. There is no existential threat, military threat to Israel. Okay,
No.
I'm as hardcore as you can get, but Israel has a nuclear bomb. We all know this, and Israel's a tremendous power. What happened in Gaza, in the last summer, and in 2008, and what happened in Lebanon 2006, these were not existential wars. These were wars basically saying, Israel got bombed, etc., terrorism, etc. They had enough, and essentially they were saying, we can't get pushed around, or people will just keep doing this.
Right.
There's an expression here in Israel about mowing the lawn. You have to mow the lawn every now and then, and that's basically what they view these wars as. It's a chore. It's really sick and brutal, but you got to do it.
Now, when you talk about this nuclear bomb, they're not going to be bombing any of their immediate neighbors. If they were to ever use that bomb in a worst case scenario, are we looking at Iran, or what is a potential target?
I mean, I don't think. Well, first of all, Hamas and Hezbollah are in no state to actually challenge Israel militarily on any. It's not like they can invade Israel. Okay, they can make life real hard if Israel comes in to kick their ass. But it's not like they can. It's not like they're going to invade Tel Aviv. This is not 1967 or 1973 anymore. And they don't have in those wars you had states versus Israel.
Right.
The states around Israel, regardless of whether they made peace or not, no longer have a vested interest in contesting Israel because they know they'd lose. Their best chance was in 1973, and they completely blew it, okay, from their point of view. So it's not as if they can really, really, destroy Israel. What they could do is possibly get a nuclear bomb from Iran one day, or another source, and then use that. But it wouldn't actually wipe Israel out, So the existential threat would be something for either a population explosion and essentially erasing the borders from the West Bank and Gaza to make it a Palestinian majority state, which is what most of them want to do, or coming from a place like Iran or something, or a terrorist group that would use such a device to attack Israel.
Okay, so that brings up ISIS. I mean, ISIS seems like a disorganized mob of lunatics, but what is ISIS's goal in terms of the Jews in Israel? I mean, do they want to sweep down there eventually and just sort of cause some trouble, or are they too far away? Are they too?
No, they're actually right on the border. They're at Quneitra, I think it's called, on the border with Israel. They've been fighting it out with al-Nusra and the Assad forces. It's a mess up there.
Oh.
So they're actually, you can see their flags from certain points on the checkpoint border from Israel. And certain, I mean, it's not where most people will live, but they are actually on the border of Israel.
But the Israelis, do they just roll their eyes at this and just go, "Oh God, yeah, more Islamic radicals, great. We've been here, done that." I mean,
They're
that shocked. Okay.
Well, Israel supports the Kurds and has supported them for quite a while, and the Kurds are actually very pro-Israel overall, and tend to be very progressive. I mean, they are Muslim, and they do have a few abhorrent practices which are actually changing. They are becoming more progressive, and they are stopping certain practices more and more. So you see progress with the Kurds.
Mm-hmm.
And they also don't use tactics like suicide bombers, and they have women in charge of full battalions, etc. There's a Vice documentary. I think we mentioned it yesterday. Should check it out. That they're very pro-Israel, and they have very close ties to Israel. So the Kurds are fighting ISIS, and Israel is keeping abreast of it. I'm sure they're involved in certain ways in intelligence and support. I mean, they don't talk about it openly, but yeah.
So theoretical situation: if the Kurds got a state somehow, if all this worked out for them,
Yeah.
would Israel declare an allegiance with that state, or would that be too insane?
I think they would eventually. They probably wouldn't right away for diplomatic reasons, so that the Kurds could get some recognition from Arab countries, etc. But it's very well understood that the Kurds are friendly to Israel, absolutely, and do not support jihad against Israel in any way whatsoever.
Okay, now I want you to explain to me the phrase "open air prison." Is that a fair assessment? Why or why not?
You mean of Gaza?
Yeah.
I would say it actually is essentially a reality, but the problem is that it's a reality which they could very well avoid. It's not, Israel didn't pull out of Gaza with the intention of making this an open air prison. They actually had some incentives to try to make peace with the Palestinians. There were a lot of billionaires who invested a lot in these greenhouses in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
I had visited these greenhouses back in '98. My brother was dating at the time a girl whose father was one of the heads of Agrexco, which is this huge Israeli agricultural multi-billion-dollar company, and they grew billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars of flowers, like exotic flowers, etc., and fruits and vegetables. I mean, this is a really huge industry in Gaza. And when they left, these billionaires basically paid for these greenhouses to give it to the Palestinians who had been working there, some of whom I met when I went to visit these greenhouses. To continue this industry, because it was a thriving industry, and it would have provided with the Palestinians with a hell of a lot of money, and there was no need for like investing in infrastructure because it was all there. It was working already. These guys already knew how to operate the place. They'd been working with the Israelis for years and years. And what did Hamas do the moment that that Israel pulled out. Literally, the same hour they destroyed all of these greenhouses, famously so.
Mm.
And people forget in the West today, but like it was all over the news. People were appalled. They were like, "What the hell are they doing?" You know, they're destroying their own industry.
So is that one of the reasons? Like, why is Gaza in such disarray? Why is there like what's the economy like? What's the currency like? Is it?
Well, there's no real economy. I mean, what does Gaza produce? You know, Gaza could be a beautiful place. It could literally be like the next Club Med to go to.
Mhm.
It has incredible beaches. It's right on the Mediterranean. It's gorgeous. It's sunny. You could build an incredible city there. I mean, the Israelis have done it right up the road. It's the same coastline.
Right.
It's not as if they wouldn't have the you know, the means to do it. But other than that, in the greenhouses, they have no real economy. Fishing, I guess, but there's no, you know, right now they have no economy, and they didn't have an economy
Right.
back then. And
They never
yeah,
have. This is
no,
historically.
right,
Right.
right. It was a, you know, it was basically a small area near a beach and on a beach, and it didn't have a real thriving economy.
So I feel like if I were to entertain this with any sort of liberal or anybody, I don't know, who had pro-Palestinian feelings, they would instantly just blame Israel and say, "Oh, the reason that Gaza can't get its shit together is because of the Jews in Israel." But
Yeah,
I feel like that's a massive cop out. And
it is. It's as you know, Ayan Hirsi Ali says, you know, the prejudice of low expectations.
right.
And it is. I mean, look, I am fully aware that life in Gaza is a miserable hell right now. I
Mhm.
understand this, but you know, life in you know, in Nazi Germany.
Mhm.
I'm not going to say that they're Nazis necessarily, even though I believe that they were damn fucking close. But
Mhm.
you know, life in Berlin was absolute fucking hell for a while before the war ended. It doesn't.
Mhm.
It's not like, you know, that's the consequence of war. It's not because necessarily because, you know, that's the Israelis' plan all along. You know, it wasn't the
Right.
Allies' plan to necessarily make life a living hell for your average, you know, Berliner. I know it's
But but in both cases, ironically, they blame the Jews for their lack of prosperity, and they
yeah,
formed a common enemy, and then just targeted all their nationalism towards the enemy.
but that's exactly what the Nazis did, in fact.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's the
Yeah,
exact
yeah,
same parallel.
yeah, absolutely. And people refuse to actually make that comparison because they somehow think it's unfair or it's not right or something. But
Well, I watched a documentary about Hitler meeting with the
yeah,
Mufti of
yeah,
Jerusalem or whatever,
yeah, yeah,
and then forming some SS division of
yeah.
Muslims.
Al Husseini, yeah, yeah,
Oh man, I mean that's just such a hidden gem on the internet that you just find, and you're just like, oh my
yeah.
god,
Yeah,
are
well,
you kidding me?
it's really worse than that because a lot of what doesn't get told is there were a lot of Palestinians at that time who were um, peaceful with the idea of Zionism and actually wanted to work towards you know, cooperation, collaboration, etc. But they were actually killed off by Al Husseini and his cohorts as
Mm,
traitors. They were brutally murdered. I mean, in horrific ways.
yeah,
Uh, you know,
this reminds me. I went to the Anne Frank Museum in Berlin a couple years ago, and just reading that Anne Frank book again, and just to hear her sister who died in the
yeah,
Belsen, her goal was to become a nurse and go to Israel, and sort of,
yeah,
you know, that was the big movement, and that was the plan B or plan A basically, and very tragic that she never got to make it there.
yeah. I agree. But you know, I mean, again, the parallels there. They're all there for everybody to see,
Mm,
and in a sense, this movement of jihadism is a continuation in a lot of ways of the Nazi movements of the 1930s, and we're heavily influenced by the Nazi movement. You know, it's
yeah,
it's not as if
it's just a passing of the torch. It's a passing of the baton.
it is. I mean, it's not as if there weren't periods of time in which they were doing this on their own. There many times they were, but this, let's say, ideologically driven, agenda driven goal of eliminating the Jews entirely is definitely comes from the 1930s and 1940s Nazi movement, and you see it all the time. I mean, if you go to the Arab world, you'll see, Nazism is essentially praised there. Yeah, just look at memory videos.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. I know. I see. I see it.
Yeah,
That stuff is amazing.
yeah,
Whoever does those, it's really a godsend that they translate all that stuff.
yeah. They've been doing it for a long time too, by the way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, okay. So here's a dumb question. I'm proud to announce. Why do the Palestinians need Israel to okay their statehood? Why do they need permission? Like they're their mommy and daddy or something.
Well, they don't really. They are trying now to do it on their own, but the problem is that the Palestinians don't have an industry. I mean, it's like what's the industry, and name me a ghetto in America.
Mhm.
What do they actually create that people buy? Uh,
Crack.
yeah, I mean, what's the industry in Harlem? Although Harlem actually had a little bit of a turnaround, so that's not fair. But another place. Palestine doesn't have an industry. And in fact, they get almost all their water from Israelis. They get all their electricity from Israel.
Mhm.
Most of their jobs are from Israel.
Okay, so this strikes me as an embarrassing situation. It strikes me as this is going to step on toes, and people are going to absorb this as a shot to the ego. That we are failing as a people, we are failing as a society. We blame these people. We don't want to admit this to ourselves. Is that
Right,
is that happening here?
right, and remember, it's more than just these things we think about: jobs, water, electricity, but it's things we don't think about. A currency, for example, they have no currency. They have
Really?
no designs for having a currency.
What do
As
they
far as
use?
they use shekels.
What are feckles?
Shekels is
Oh, shekel. Oh, shekel. I
yeah,
thought you said feckle. Okay.
no, shekels.
Um,
Yeah. Um,
yeah, I think you have to pay 50 shekels to if you rape somebody, you have to pay their father
yeah.
50 shekels.
When I
Is that
think
still the going rate?
yeah, I don't know, but when I think of shekels, or as some Americans here say, schmeckles.
Mhm.
I think of that scene in The Life of Brian when he's trying
Haggle for the beard.
yeah, absolutely haggle for the gourd.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That, yeah.
Uh,
But they use shekels,
so
and
isn't that an extra slap in the face that they're using the currency of the evil
yeah,
Jew?
absolutely, and
Okay.
and I know it grates on their nerves. I- When I went to the territories in the late '80s, when I was in high school in Israel, I did a report on the Intifada, which was the first Intifada,
Mhm.
and I did some really stupid things. I went to demonstrations that said I could have gotten killed.
Mm.
But I was there, and
You don't
and
pass
they
off
were
as an Arab?
blonde hair, blue eyes, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So or green eyes, I suppose. But yeah. My father is from Egypt, so
Hmm.
but I got my mother's genes, I suppose. The
Mhm.
the thing is that they were using in some cases Jordanian dinars because it had only been 20 years since they had been occupied,
Mhm.
and many of them were still going across the border to Jordan and coming back, etc., over the Allenby Bridge, which was open to Palestinians to go back and forth into Jordan. So they were using sometimes, but by and large, they were still using shekels and sometimes dollars, etc. Now they mostly use shekels.
Yeah, it reminds me, I used to live in Buenos Aires for several months, and there's sort of an anti-American sentiment in Argentina.
Hmm.
They're not big fans, and yet they use the American dollar there as to support their currency, which is a mess. So the
Yeah.
peso, the Argentine peso, is the inflation is ridiculous, and the whole thing is like teetering on the verge of collapse at all times.
Hmm.
And so they begrudgingly are like, "Yeah, give me those U.S. dollars, but fuck the USA."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it essentially was the same thing. When you go to the shuk in Jerusalem, the Arab shuk back then, a lot of times they still will ask you sometimes for to pay in American dollars, but by and large, yeah, they use shekels, and I understand how it would be insulting to them from their point of view, but that's they never made an effort to make their own currency.
Okay, so if they did make a currency, would the Prophet Muhammad be on the currency?
It's a good question. I think not. Yeah, I think not.
Yeah, you're in a real bind there. What do you put on the currency?
Yeah, I
Uh,
think not.
um, okay, so then if there was to be a two-state situation, like say right now, a proposal was put out, what would the geography of the Palestinian state look like?
We pretty much know what it would look like. It would look like the Gaza and the West Bank, possibly some sort of land bridge tunnel or highway connecting the two. We know what this final deal will look like. It was proposed in 2000, by Ehud Barak
Yeah.
and rejected by Arafat. But this is the I mean, given, and it was reproposed with some additional changes two more times. It's not as if neither side will give much beyond what was proposed, and
And
we know that has to be the final outcome.
is it really being hung up because they will not recognize Israel's right to exist?
No, it's Abbas recognizes Israel's right to exist. What he refuses to recognize is Israel's right as a Jewish state.
Well, what is that? That's semantics. I mean, what?
Well, because, like I said, what they truly want, is to erase the borders and to flood the area with Palestinians and basically have a majority and destroy Israel from the inside. This is not a conspiracy theory on my part.
Mhm,
This is something
mhm.
that which they have repeatedly stated over and over again, from the highest echelons to the lowest people on the street. This is something which, if you read the Arab media, the Arab press, they have been discussing for the last 30 or 40 years. It's not they don't talk about it in English, which is why memory was started, because they'll say
Right.
things in Arabic. Arafat would say things in Arabic that he wouldn't say in English.
Okay, so if the leader of Hamas goes to the bargaining table and says, "Look, I recognize your right to exist. We signed a peace treaty. I recognize the Jewish state, but we want the West Bank and Gaza, and let's just do this and be done with it." And then he walks back to his people, he's going to get stoned to death. Is that
Yeah.
basically
Well, that's what Arafat said, why he rejected the peace treaty.
nobody would have been okay with it?
He said he feared for his life. He said that he feared that they would do to him what they did to Sadat.
I feel like I woke up in the middle of the night when Arafat died and saw live coverage of his body being
Yeah.
carried around. Did they do that? Why did they do that?
Well, it was a Palestinian funeral. They get all excited.
But they,
Like a lot of other people do too. It's not necessary. But yeah, they really went all out on it. I remember watching it. I was in San Francisco at the time, and
but the Jews don't do that. They don't carry their dead around, do they?
no, they don't tend to do that. No, no.
Bring out your dead.
Yeah. I mean, it was the whole martyr funeral, etc. Yeah,
Oh God.
I
Okay.
know.
Here's a question that just popped up. It's totally ridiculous, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Who was fatter, Ariel Sharon or Arafat?
I think Ariel Sharon
Yeah.
for
Now,
sure.
when
Yeah.
he was a war hero, he was a in shape guy. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was literally a hero on the field of combat in 1948. I mean, he really sorry, 47. He was he was fighting hand to hand,
Now,
and
you you had mentioned that he became a hero because he disobeyed orders and took his tank
yeah,
division.
in 1973,
And
essentially.
now, what was the order that he disobeyed? Just to
To
stay
be
put.
yeah, essentially he took his tank column and outflanked the Egyptian, I believe it was the Third Army, cut them off in the Sinai, and threatened Cairo with a column of tanks. There
And
was
he
nobody to defend Cairo, so you know.
So did he received no punishment from the Israeli forces for this? I mean,
No, I don't believe he received punishment. He had received punishment in 1981 for the Sabra and Shatila massacre,
uh,
for which they held him accountable, even though it wasn't Israeli forces doing it, but he was overseeing the forces and the area. So he did get um, censored for that, and he did get punished for that. But no, in 1973, I don't believe he got punished
okay.
at all.
So it's sort of like a basketball game when your point guard takes a long 3-point shot and the coach is going no 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 and then it goes
Yeah,
in. He goes, oh yes, good shot.
yeah. Essentially, is that's probably. I mean, I imagine he got a bit of a dressing down at first.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if Sharon was around today, what would he say about the current situation, and what would he do?
Well, that's the thing. Nobody knows. Before his stroke, he was the one who created a centrist party in Israel. He decided to unite the left and the right and pull out unilaterally out of Gaza because he saw it as an untenable position. But what his overall strategy would have been, nobody knows. He died before. Well, he went comatose before anybody could find out. So a lot of people actually at that time were wondering
Mm.
what the hell he's thinking, because they opposed the pullout, etc. They couldn't believe that he was doing this. But many people would say I still have faith in him. I still believe in Ariel Sharon. So it was kind of it was a bit of a contentious issue. Nobody really knew, and I don't know. I don't think we'll ever know unless we find some sort of hidden documents that he wrote or something.
I see. Some unearth some scriptures that Sharon wrote,
Yeah,
buried in the Dead Sea.
yeah.
Okay, so I have a question about your views on America, and just how much of a safety blanket, how much comfort does the average Israeli have knowing that the most powerful military the earth has ever seen has their back?
A lot. Israelis, by and large, absolutely love America, and they always have.
Hmm.
There are a lot of Israelis that immigrated from America. There's a huge amount of ties between American organizations and Israel, and not only that, American businesses in Israel, American military in Israel. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Are there
Uh,
more Jews in America or Israel?
America,
Hmm.
I believe. But I think there's 14 million Jews worldwide, something like that, maybe.
Hmm.
Like you said, it's like a unicorn.
Yeah, you really do have to
There,
pet the snout
yeah,
of a
there
Jew.
are there are tribes in Africa. I think there are 3 or 4 tribes actually that have more members in Africa than the total amount of Jews in the world. But
Is there any movement, any fringe movement within Israel that just says, let's move to Iceland?
yeah, well, no,
Nothing
no,
like that, huh?
no. Israelis, by and large, just say, look, we've been a country for quite a while now. Just accept it, live with it.
Okay. So,
Um, yeah.
because I've seen other communities, like living in Buenos Aires, I was living in the Armenian district, and it
Mhm.
was like a thriving Armenian. It was so random, I'm in the middle of Argentina, and there's Armenians everywhere. And then I went to visit Senegal, and I was living in a Lebanese area. The
Yeah,
Lebanese have basically taken over Senegal, or they have their pocket, their community, and they do really well there, and
yeah,
they're happy as a clam.
yeah,
Beirut is no no party.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but the Jews, they're basically committed. They've doubled down. This is it. We're staying.
Yeah, look, they created an entirely modern society. I mean, yeah, it has problems just like any other, first
Mhm.
world nation, and sometimes you kind of think you're still stuck in a third world nation at times. But by and large, it's a hugely modern society, and
Yeah,
and
give me an example, like air conditioning. How
oh,
widespread? How
oh,
good is the?
yeah, no, almost everybody has air conditioning. In fact, there's some things that the rest of the world could learn from Israel. Almost every single place here, and there's almost every single building has a solar panel up on their roof, and
Hmm.
since decades now. That's how actually most people heat their water for showers and stuff. You have to turn it on,
Hmm.
you wait 10 minutes, and then you take your shower. And that's that a lot of solar technology comes from Israel. Um,
Hmm, cool.
so it there are things that they're turning very green oriented in terms
Hmm.
of environmental issues, etc. It's not perfect, but they're much more like Europe in that sense than America for sure.
Okay. Um, what do you think about the fact that the world has awoken to the threat of Islam, especially just in the last 10 years, whereas Israel has been dealing with the constant shitstorm from jihadis, for centuries, decades, just
Yeah.
on and on. What is it? Is it sort of comforting for Israelis to realize that everybody else is now aware of this? So the people in Europe, the people in Australia, America, to varying degrees, but we are all sort of now facing the same problem.
Yeah, but they don't see much result from that. They don't see much sympathy from it, because people will still make an exception when it comes to Israel. They'll still say, yeah, but if it wasn't for the occupation, you
Right.
know. Um, so the occupation is always the first thing people will think about.
So, what do you think would happen if Mexico did exactly what the people in Gaza were doing?
Oh, I think we would obliterate Mexico.
I mean, I can imagine like if Tijuana was like that and San Diego was getting bombed and
Yeah, I mean, look, let's be honest. When was the last time that America reacted well to being attacked?
well, Pearl Harbor was not,
Yeah,
that that
you
was a
know,
bit of a
uh,
backlash.
I mean, look, you don't need to lose a lot of people in an attack to be a nation that feels that you have to respond. You can lose almost nobody, and if the attack is big enough and consistent and lengthy enough, you just at that point you have to say, well, I have to start pushing back, especially in this neighborhood where not pushing back means you're weak,
Hmm.
and it is seen as a weakness. If
Yeah, I
you know,
mean the whole 9/11 incident. We got what 19 Saudi Arabians, and then we just go off and attack
yeah,
basically just random countries in the Middle East who, I knew a guy who knew a guy who harbored a guy. It's just like, ah,
yeah.
fuck it, just go ballistic.
Well, they that happened because of Osama's paper tiger comment. Essentially, he called us a paper tiger for
Hmm. Called a
our
bluff.
yeah, he did. He did.
Hmm.
He was wrong, but that's how he saw us.
So really quickly, I would love to get your take on the historical claims to the land. Um, and just, is there any argument to be had that the Jews have no claim to this land?
No, that's a ridiculous argument, frankly. Look, I studied, like I said, some history. I studied some archaeology here in Israel. There is no doubt that the Hebrew people,
Right.
essentially their entire culture, their entire sociology, etc., it originates from here. And believe it or not, many Palestinians will think this is a conspiracy, that this was planted in history, that it's not true, etc. But we know this, and the Romans wrote about it. The Greeks wrote. I mean, every single ancient civilization that in this area knew exactly where the Hebrews were, and
But
this is not in contest.
I just love the idea that it's sort of like this notion that it's whoever got there first, like they called dibs on the land or something. I mean,
Yeah,
disregarding the fact that the Romans didn't give a shit who called dibs on the land.
no,
The Ottomans couldn't give a fuck. The British didn't care.
right.
None of these people care. They just did what they had to do. I
Well,
mean,
hell, look at the jihad. You posted a video yesterday about the jihad and how it expanded into Europe, etc. And people forget that this is, how did all these lands become Islamic? How did they become Arab? They weren't before.
right.
They were conquered directly, and very quickly. I mean, there was an absolute feeling of threat in Europe
It's a
from,
land grab. Yeah,
yeah,
it was interesting because I just lived in Barcelona for a few months, and all the Muslim activity there, I really didn't see like any architecture. It seems Christian as hell over there to me. So
well, they destroyed a lot of the architecture when they
yeah,
came back.
I mean, I didn't see a museum. I didn't see anything. It was just
Yeah,
all
yeah.
Christian.
Yeah, because
They won. They
yeah,
essentially.
the Reconquista, they destroyed a lot of it. I mean, I understand. Look, it was 500 years ago. They weren't politically correct back then. I understand that.
But like, I also lived in Budapest for a while, and there's a lot of Jewish tradition there, and you still see these beautiful synagogues, and there's a Holocaust museum there and everything.
Yeah,
Of course, they shipped off all their Jews during World War II and almost eradicated every Jew in
yeah. But
Budapest.
the difference with the reconquest of Spain was that where Jewish populations have survived and where certain cultural things have survived, the Jews weren't fighting the Christians, in battle.
Hmm.
So they were the enemy, but they were the underdog enemy that we could just push around. Whereas in terms of Muslims in Spain, they were the active enemy, which who had been killing us on the battlefield, blah blah blah. So let's just kill them and then destroy what they have. So it wasn't as if they were, they had taken over Spain. It's not as if Jews had taken over other
Right.
areas of
They were actually, yeah, they were a cornerstone of the community. I mean, they were as much a part of these cities as anybody else.
yeah.
So you said you studied Jewish history. So let me ask you a point blank question: were there Jews in Egypt?
You mean for the Exodus? No.
For the,
There might have been a few people who traveled from Egypt
mhm.
to Judea,
Just took,
essentially,
took a road trip.
to Israel. Well, they might have fled for various reasons, but we're talking probably just literally a band of people, like maybe 100 people or so. Who knows? We don't know, but
Right.
no, there was never a massive exodus. No, and
Okay.
there were no Jewish slaves building the pyramids. None of that. No.
So you deny the fact that the Red Sea was split in two.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely.
You're a Red Sea denier. Oh, wow.
Absolutely. I'm a Red Sea denier.
I
Yeah.
outed you. I outed you on this. On that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Let me sift through these questions here.
Are these questions of yours, or are there people commenting? I'm just curious.
No, no, these are all my
Oh,
questions.
okay. Okay.
This is like, it's a fantasy of mine. And when
Yeah.
do you get an Israeli on the phone? Never. This is my first conversation
Okay.
with a
All right.
guy in Haifa. So, um, okay, so leaving Gaza. I was overhearing some guy talking about how they cannot leave, like they cannot leave for travel
Right.
or for any purpose. So, what is the thought process behind it? It's basically they've been declared combatants in war, or it sounds like. I mean, there's no travel.
Well, yeah, essentially. I mean, like I said, it is a prison. I'm not denying that. I'm not denying the horrific nature of life in Gaza right now. But again, it's avoidable. Should there be a movement to overthrow Hamas and instill some sort of liberal, progressive, or even conservative liberal, value party or system in Gaza,
Hmm.
this would be over. It would be absolutely over. There's no question about it.
Okay, but they can leave through Egypt though? Yes, or
No, no.
so
Borders.
Egypt?
Yeah.
So they're absolutely trapped.
Yes, and Egypt is more vehement about not letting stuff in than Israel is.
So they're trapped in a small space and they're breeding like rabbits, which
Mm.
is making the situation even more inflamed and
Right,
desperate and horrible.
right. But
Jesus.
but the alternative was, as we saw 15 years ago, um, lots and lots of suicide bombings,
And
which
isn't it also not just the fact they can't leave, but where would they go? Like
right.
who would take them in? Like there's nobody that wants them to.
Well, remember that, yeah, the Arab world hates Palestinians. They pay lip service to and they support the Palestinians in their struggle, but they don't want them
Mhm.
as citizens. I mean, there's tons of them living all over the Arab world, but they're denied any citizenship in any Arab country whatsoever.
Isn't it true that the Egyptians and the Jordanians basically occupied Palestinian land for long stretches of time?
Well, yeah, Gaza was occupied by Egypt until 1967, and the West Bank. Why does Israel call it the West Bank? It's not the West Bank of Israel. It's
Hmm.
to the east. It's the West Bank of Jordan.
Right.
That's why it's
So
called the West Bank. you know.
and so there is no criticism of Jordan and Egypt though, because you're never going to hear CNN do a hit piece on
No, no.
Egypt's occupation of Gaza.
Well,
Or
it was proposed that Israel try to give Gaza back to Egypt, but Egypt said it didn't want it.
mhm,
they knew better than to take that hornet's nest.
mhm. Okay.
Nobody wants Gaza at this point. The only
Right.
people who want to be there are these religious fanatics, who are very, very few in number, who see it as biblical land, which it actually is biblical land, but it's not a, you know, to think that you're going to rebuild the biblical Israel in Gaza is just idiotic, frankly.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, let me ask you about some of this religiosity down there. I mean, because you hear about people saying, "Oh, they want a genocide. They want to wipe out the Jews. They want to push
Mhm.
Israel out of existence." Now, how much of this is sort of hyperbole? How much is actually no? They literally want to kill all the Jews.
Um, it's hard to tell, but I would think that the majority really. Okay, let me put it to you this way.
Hmm.
You look at Nazi Germany. I don't think in the 1930s most Germans who were following the Nazis and who approved of the Nazis who were marching, and I don't think most of them actually really would have gone around killing Jews.
Right.
It's only when the Nazis took power where that
Mhm.
became possible that they really no longer saw that as a barrier. Okay.
It seemed like a lot of the Germans at the time, everybody had like, well, not these 5 Jews that I know. They're nice
Right.
guys because I know them. Like, let's not
Exactly.
kill them.
And if you ask Palestinians, it's kind of the same exact response.
Mhm.
So yeah, you know,
So this is tribalism gone mental, basically.
essentially,
And
yeah. Yeah.
if there was more dialogue and more sort of coexistence, people would say, oh, well, these people like hummus just like I like hummus. So what the fuck?
Yeah, you have to understand that for the most part, a lot of Palestinians from the West Bank have a lot of interaction with Israelis on a daily basis.
Mhm.
Um, so there, a lot of Palestinians, in fact, speak Hebrew fluently. So they have like you said, it'll be like, well, this guy I know, he's a nice guy. He's Jewish, but he's a nice guy. He's Israeli, but he's a nice guy. That
Mhm.
sort of thing. I wouldn't hurt him, but I just hate Israelis in general, sort of thing.
Right.
You know,
Okay. So yeah, I figured it might be something like that. I want to get your thoughts on the Geneva Convention and if that comes into play at all, and also the
I
moral
have, I have
commitment.
to I have to groan here. I had a huge argument 3 nights ago about with my friend Gabriel, who's also Israeli.
Oh, really? What was
He
her
was on
stance?
my side, but we were arguing with other people in a hangout about the Geneva Convention and America, etc. Yeah.
So all I'm saying is, if what is the point of the Geneva Convention if one side isn't following it?
Well, that's the point we were making. Yeah, look, I'll go back to my argument, which you hadn't heard, but people were
Mhm.
saying, well, America, Guantanamo Bay, evil, blah blah blah. Um, they keep saying, it's breaking the Geneva Convention. It's actually not. It's following the Geneva Convention to the letter as best as they think they
Also,
can.
also, let me just say that the people in Guantanamo Bay get more health care than I do,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
probably eat better than I do. And Jesus,
yeah.
and
So
there's like 60 of them. How many are there? There's like less than 100 or something.
it's not that many. I mean, I have my own thoughts about Guantanamo Bay, but the fact is that America is actually observing the Geneva Convention by and large because these
Hmm.
people are non-uniform. They're illegal combatants. Okay, they are in a sense war criminals. This is not contestable legally speaking. Okay, these people are breaking the legal codes of war.
Hmm.
They go out to directly threaten civilians. They use them as shields, human shields. They kill them to make political points. They don't wear a uniform in battle. They hide behind civilians, etc. This is all illegal in a military context.
Right.
So
Now, let me add to that. Just a quick question. True or false? Did the Palestinians have used schools to store weapons and to fire rockets
yeah,
from?
yeah, absolutely, yeah, and that wasn't even contested. I mean, that there's news teams that saw it and reported on it.
And I read a report where they're using Red Cross trucks, like ambulances, to
Yeah,
transport weapons and
yes,
soldiers.
that has been done in the past. I don't know if it was done this time around, but yeah, it has been done in the past. Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. They had done that in Lebanon. They had done it in the West Bank and Gaza as well.
So, I mean, it's basically war is hell, and all's fair in love and war. I mean, this
Yeah.
is not new, anything we're seeing here.
Well, look, I am fully ready to admit that when the Haganah was fighting the British, they were doing some of the same things. They weren't targeting civilians to kill them necessarily. I mean, they called when they bombed the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. They actually called ahead and said, "There's a bomb in your hotel. You should evacuate now." The reason that nobody evacuated is because the guy thought it wasn't for real.
Wait a minute, who is the Haganah? I'm thinking
Oh,
Haagen-Dazs here.
this is the Haganah is the pre-IDF. This is pre State of Israel. When they
Okay,
were fighting the
so
British for independence.
so
So they also did, you know, typical stuff like hide, you
Mhm.
know, an ambulance, etc. That's fine. It's just that when you're found out, you deal with the consequences, and you know, you that means you get shot. Okay, so that's what the British did, or they hung people, which they did, and that's the consequence of it. So I'm not denying that liberation groups or terrorist groups. I should say terrorist groups or liberation groups have done certain things like this in the past, and that
Mhm.
the Palestinians are an exception. I'm just saying that, you know, they should accept the consequences of their actions,
Right.
and the consequences that you get caught, then you get killed. You
Do
know,
you
that's it.
do you find it especially priceless and comedic and hypocritical that a lot of the criticism of Israel comes from like progressives and liberals in America who don't exactly have the most pristine track record when it comes to war crimes over the past 100 years?
Yeah, I do, and I find it also I find it duplicitous in a sense, because it, like I said, it was you know, liberals and the left that essentially created Israel, and it was not the right wing, and now they're sort of like
Flip
trying to
flopped.
couch this in some sort of religious war when they never did before, and
Hmm.
it's only because they now see the you know, when Israel was seen as the downtrodden, as the underdog, they were the ones lauded by the left, and now that they're on top, now it's the Palestinians that are lauded by the left. You know, to me, you got to pick a side and stick with it. You just,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, it's just amazing. Like in '67, when Israel is fighting for its existence, America is off in Vietnam, you know, burning women and children and creating necklaces out of ears.
yeah,
So it's not exactly like we have a leg to stand on. I do find that a bit um, bile churning. If I
yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Yeah, and look, I can criticize Israel on a lot of things, and that's perfectly legitimate. But the fact is that overall, it, you know, they do so much less bad than
hmm,
almost any other army in the world at war, since mind you, 70 years. I mean, this has not been a cakewalk. This has not been a war that has only lasted 3 or 4 or 5 years. This is a
right,
war that's been going on for 70 years.
and I just feel like they all want to say like, oh, what a lovely war. Like they want some sort of idealized war, and it's like if you want to do it that way, then tell Hamas to put on their green uniforms, meet us out in the desert, and we'll have a fight. You know, we'll meet after school. Basically, they're not going to do that.
Yeah, well, look, I know that Hamas is not idiots. They're not going to fight on the battlefield because they know they would get crushed. I mean, it's very simple. The only way that Hamas can survive fighting Israel and Hezbollah and the rest is by fighting
Mm,
essentially an urban guerrilla war.
right.
They'll still lose, and they'll get their asses kicked. But
Now
you know,
let's talk about the war of propaganda. I've seen a lot of footage of what they're teaching the Palestinian children, and it's been abhorrent. Like it's unbelievable, surreal to look at
yeah,
it. But what are they teaching the Jewish kids in school? I'm talking about from early on. What is the message? How much vitriol is in that process?
there's nothing vitriol. You want to know what TV looks like for kids in Israel? Look at Nickelodeon and stuff. That's what we have
Mhm.
here.
So there is
We
no
have it in Hebrew too. So
so
you
there
know,
is no equivalent program where it's like Sesame Street, but
no,
totally anti-Muslim
no,
or
it's actually Sesame Street and it's dubbed in Hebrew.
oh wow.
It's the exact same thing. It's Nickelodeon, it's Cartoon Network, it's all those channels right here.
And
Many of the programs either dubbed in Hebrew or with subtitles.
And do the parents in Israel, do they try to shelter their children and try to create some sort of childhood, some sort of innocence?
Yeah,
How,
but doesn't I mean, you know, yeah, but I honestly don't know what that would look like, because I grew up in when I was very young. I lived in London, and there were the IRA bombings at that time in the early 70s. And I
mhm.
remember one of the first things I remember is my dad looking under the car to see if there were any bombs. One of the first things my brother remembers is getting, I think, his when he was 4 years old, he got a birthday cake at Harrods. He was about to eat a Black Forest chocolate cake. poor kid, and there was a bomb threat, and we had to all run out, and he never got his cake.
Damn.
So I mean, yeah, I mean, these are like, in a sense, you could look at it and say that's a first world problem, and I'm sure, yeah, it is. But for a 4-year-old, that's like the trauma of your life,
Yeah, scarring.
I mean, he laughs about it now. It's a joke for us now, but obviously. But so since I've been very young, I've been aware of bomb threats and war, etc.
Yeah, you guys have been hardened. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like the temperament of the average Israeli is pretty.
Yeah, but I didn't grow up here. I grew up in England, and I grew up in Belgium and France, etc. But it was during the 70s. There was a lot of terrorism going on when we would travel around by airplane. People were already searching us in Europe for bombs on planes, etc. That was just the norm back in the 70s, and
Mm.
Arafat started all the whole hijacking the planes, etc. And that's where Black September came from, etc. So
Yeah, I was
it's not.
doing I was doing some research into plane hostage takeover situations, and I think since 1980, 72% or 73% of all hijackings have been Muslims.
Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt it. That's basically because you had a few that were like the typical 70s, take me to Cuba sort of hijacking.
Well, that
That,
was it. Was actually, I think a lot of those were coming from like Russians, and there were some other
Mhm.
nationalities who were doing the "get me the hell out of here" sort of
Yeah,
takeover, which just doesn't
yeah,
seem so insidious as we're all going to hell here.
yeah. I mean, it's not the same thing, and most people didn't die. I mean, I remember. You remember the TWA hijacking? I think it was 1984 that landed in Lebanon. I think it was,
Mhm.
and they actually had they stormed the plane at the end, I believe, and they one of the hostages was killed, etc. But it was that was like one of the first hijackings in which it was they really like threatened to kill everybody, and
Yeah,
Muslim terrorism, etc. That was really a big deal, and it lasted a while.
yeah. What is your memory of the Munich situation,
You mean with the
the Olympics and the Jewish
yeah.
Olympics?
Honestly, I don't remember that much of it. To be quite honest, I was very young.
Mhm.
Very, very young. One of the first things I do remember is the 1973 war on TV, parts of the 1970 war, 73 war, Yom Kippur War.
Did Did you see the film Munich?
Yeah, I did actually.
And did that produce some, I don't know, pride, or what is it like to be a Jewish person and watch that?
I don't know. I mean, it's really kind of I'm distanced by time, and I'm also distanced by the fact that terrorism has changed so much.
Mhm.
Um, you know, back in the Munich days, the demands were different, the ideology was different, the expectations were different. I mean, Munich ended up being a disaster, but it was kind of the exception. Today it would be the norm, you see.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and so I suppose I've been very jaded by all of this, and
Right.
it's hard to look at it from a perspective of having lived back then, because I was too young to really remember that.
Let me ask you, as somebody who's been in and out of Israel, is the Jewish sense of humor in Israel darker than it is outside of Israel? Like they seem to still maintain a quite a vibrant sense of humor, but
It's pretty much the same. It's Jewish humor. I mean, they do make jokes about the situation, but it's I mean, Jewish humor always takes on tragedy. It's always taken
right.
on tragedy as like someone like the I forget who said it was either Mel Brooks, like a guy who dies of cancer, that's a tragedy. A guy's walking down the street, falls down a manhole and dies, that's comedy. You know,
Right, right.
you know.
Oh my God, it's actually shocking. What if growing up, you don't really keep a tally on who's Jewish and who's not. But if you
Right.
do see a list of the Jewish comedians, it is ridiculous how much laughter they've given the world. It's like,
Yeah, it's self-deprecating humor, quite frankly, for the most part.
man,
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan.
Yeah.
All right, let me talk to you about liberals in the U.S. Are you surprised that they have, or progressives have sort of turned their back on Israel and like are demonizing Israel to the extent that they have?
Well, I'm not surprised anymore because I when I was in high school, the first Intifada started, and I was in America the first year, and then I was in Israel the second year. But a lot of my friends were seeing this on the news and turned very anti-Israel, etc. They didn't really know anything about it. But I
Right.
understand. I mean, they were what, 16, 15, 16, what can you know
Nothing.
in detail?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
And I remember arguing a bit with them, but I didn't actually take their views too seriously. But so I've been living with this since, 1988,
Yeah.
in terms of seeing the left turn on Israel.
But I think it has a lot to do with the fact that it's an instinctual knee-jerk reaction to the fact that the right does support Israel. So
Yes,
if
yeah.
the like they're not going to agree with the right, so they must be wrong. So therefore, we're against Israel.
Right. When a guy like Mike Huckabee opens his mouth and says, I support Israel. Well, thanks, Mike. You just alienated a hell of a lot of, potential supporters that just think you're trash and
Yeah,
an idiot,
yeah, but
including myself.
he's trying to clear the runway for Jesus Christ to return. So he's expecting the end of times to come any day now. So
Yeah, I mean, the day that a guy like Mike Huckabee would win the election would be like a day I would move out of the United. I mean, if I was living there, I'd move the hell out of the United States. That's
oh
happening.
man,
I mean, that would be it for me.
I think
Um,
he's trying though. He's going to try again.
I know, but he doesn't have a chance. Let's
No,
be
of course not.
honest.
Yeah, I mean, because these progressives, they annoy me. I don't know if you could tell, but
Yeah,
it's just so amazing. I think everybody sort of they always root for the underdog, but the fact that you cannot see that the Jews have been the underdog for their entire existence
yeah.
is that
Well,
is really
I'll,
bizarre to
I'll
me.
I'll tell you one of the reasons. It's a point of perception, and this comes down actually to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Okay, this is something that Westerners typically don't tend to understand, even though they are taking part in it themselves. Now,
Mhm.
Palestinians see themselves as Palestinians, as a very small group of Arab people living in the land of quote unquote Palestine, in which they describe as Israel as well, in many cases. Not necessarily all of them, but many of them. Okay, and that's how Western liberals see Palestinians, as a small indigenous group. Okay, Israelis don't see Palestinians that way. The Israelis tend not to talk about them in that way. To the Israelis, and this has always been actually the word that they use, not only in Israel but in the West until the late 80s. It was always the Arab-Israeli war, the
Mhm.
Arab-Israeli war. Palestinians were seen as a part of greater Arabia in a sense, okay? It wasn't Israel versus a small group of people living in Gaza and the West Bank. It was Israel versus the entire Arab world, all, 800 million of them, okay? This is how Israel sees the conflict. And
But
and the Western liberals always want to root for the underdog, so they only see the quote unquote small indigenous population. Okay, but it was never framed that way until the late 80s, and that's when the tide turned, because it was kids throwing rocks in the street, Israel beating
mhm,
them up, that sort of thing.
okay,
But until that point, it was the Arab-Israeli wars.
yeah. So, but I mean, what does the word Arab even mean in this context anymore? I mean, it.
Well, it doesn't at this point. It's pretty much the Muslim world versus Israel, and
Yeah,
that's how Israel sees it. It's gotten bigger for Israel. It's not gotten smaller. It hasn't been, it hasn't shrunk due to the fact that the Palestinians are the ones now doing their own fighting. To Israel, it's become the entire Muslim world. It's become the entire jihadist outlook, the entire ISIS and al-Nusra and Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran and Syria, everybody
right.
against Israel. Now, that may not be a particularly healthy viewpoint, but the fact is that they have very good concerns for seeing it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're fighting a war on every front, and
Yeah.
from multiple nations. I mean, thank God they had the Mediterranean there. The last thing they need is like the Greeks to come in and attack them from the west. Like
Yeah, I
that.
mean, I can guarantee you that if the Palestinians, for some unknown reason, divorced themselves of all of this claptrap from other countries, from other movements, and said, "We don't want your support. This is our fight, and we're going to deal with Israel." Blah blah blah. The Israelis will probably start changing their perception, but the fact is that they don't do that. They
Mhm.
do ally themselves openly with with countries and organizations that openly want to erase Israel.
Mhm.
Regardless of how people think that was translated by Ahmadinejad, etc. The fact is that you ask most people or anybody in Hezbollah or Hamas or at the top level of Iran, would you want to see Israel still existing and in a peaceful two-state solution? Their answer would be no.
Hmm.
So it's just that simple.
And to give me an idea, what are the populations of Israel and the Palestinians?
Oh, you mean size-wise?
Yeah, just how many people are we talking about?
I think it's nearly 1 million people in Gaza, nearly nearly like 2 million in the West Bank, something like that. Israel has what, 8 million, I think, 7 million, 8 million people, and that
Mhm.
includes Arab Israelis who are comprised of 1 million people, and other ethnicities or small minorities here.
Yeah, so
Um,
can you explain that to me? The Arabs living in Israel, are they happy to be there? Are they considered traitors? I mean, what is
well,
the
that's a very interesting question. There's been a movement the last year or 2 years, that has been changing. There is a divide between Christians and Muslims, so Christian Arabs and Muslim Arabs, and within the Christian Arab community, there's a schism essentially.
Mhm.
One patriarch of the Christian Muslims is exceedingly pro-Israel and has been actually helping the IDF recruit more and more Christian Arabs, because remember, the Arabs don't have to go to the military here. They're not required. Any Arab here that is in the military, including Bedouin Arabs, are volunteers, and there are some. In fact, I served with some Bedouins. They're very proud to serve, and they have some very dangerous jobs. They're the trackers, etc. They are really good people. And So you have a schism, and the growing schism went so far as to now having a bill passed since a few months, I think 2 months ago or 3 months ago, where Christian Arabs can now, instead of putting down Arab on their identity card, can claim that they're Aramean,
Hmm.
because some of them are, because of what they see from ISIS, because of what they see from Christians being persecuted all over the Middle East by these jihadis, they refuse even to be recognized as Arabs. They're disgusted with some of them. I'm not saying the majority, but a significant amount and growing amount see themselves no longer as identifying as Arab, no longer wanting to be Arab, wanting to go back to their original Christian roots, which Aramean,
Mhm.
which were conquered by the Arabs, were Arabized. They didn't originally speak Arabic. They didn't originally have Arabic traditions, etc.
Right.
And so there has been a growing movement in the Christian community, and it is a very, very let's say, big schism in the Christian Arab community.
Okay.
Many of them are called traitors, etc., but there are more and more that are serving in the IDF. And if you actually watch the Twitter and Facebook of the IDF,
Mhm.
they've been supporting more and more of their Christian Arabs, soldiers who have been serving, applauding them, paying respect for them, during Christmas,
Mhm.
etc., showing that they do actually give a shit, that they
Okay.
actually care, that they see these people as part of them.
And
Um,
for the record, how many Christian suicide bombers have there been in Israel?
I think there was one like 10 years ago who was Christian, and that was, I think, the only one. So it
Did
was.
did he convert to Islam the day before the getting?
I don't know the circumstance around it, but essentially, I think there was a lone wolf
Oh wow.
Palestinian, and that was it. So like the other hundreds of them were, yeah, all Muslim. Yeah,
I'm calling a false flag on that.
yeah,
Did you catch the interview with Sam Harris and Cenk?
yeah. Of course, I watched it right when it came out.
I
Yeah,
highlighted a moment in that, which was to me one of the most insane things I'd ever heard,
yeah,
where Cenk was trying to say that everything is the fault of Israel and the Jews' occupation.
yeah.
And Sam Harris said, wait a minute, what about Sunni Shia violence in like Yemen or
Mhm.
Iraq? And he said, no, yeah, even that.
Yeah,
Because,
I remember that. I watched. I actually watched your video. It was, I think, two of them,
oh, yeah.
or something like that. Like I watched it 2 or 3 times. I sent it to my father to watch. He really enjoyed it. Yeah, I really, that blew me away
I mean,
because
seriously, like me as a guy, from Los Angeles, I'm
Yeah.
pulling my hair out listening to
Yeah.
that shit. But you sitting in Israel, what does that? How could you possibly justify that logic?
Look, I'll tell you. I'll tell you what I mean. Look, I think I kind of like Cenk or I should say, I used to like Cenk in certain ways. I used to agree with him on a lot of things. I still probably do agree with the Young Turks on certain issues, but I unsubscribed from them. Like I said, in the Gaza war, I couldn't take it anymore. The thing is that they have, like you pointed out, a narrative. They have to push this narrative. They have to push this agenda. And if it means throwing everything else under the bus, as long as they hit these, these talking points, then that's their agenda. That's what they're sticking with.
Yeah, but I mean, just to explain to the audience, what Cenk was saying was that the fact that the Jews are occupying the Palestinians, that this has radicalized all of the Muslims and has frenzied them up to make them more religious. And in that process, now they're more tribal. Now
Yeah,
they're more prone to be violent against each other, even though it's Muslims fighting Muslims. And
yeah,
it's even though it's thousands of miles away.
and even though it ignores hundreds of years of history, literally,
Yeah.
you
I
know,
mean,
it's not as if these people weren't fighting over these issues for hundreds of years. They have been.
oh my God, the Young Turks are silent about the Yemen Saudi Arabia situation now.
Absolutely,
But
absolutely, yeah,
did you see the video of the Yemen, the mosque bombing?
yeah, yeah,
And you saw the translation and just what was
yeah,
going on there, and just
yeah.
that was such a mind blower of a situation.
It's funny though, because on CNN and all the others, it actually took a couple days before that came out, as I remember, like what
Mhm.
they were chanting. Here in Israel, it came out right away.
But
Like
just
people,
but
you know.
just the fact, wrap your head around that this is a Muslim guy
Hmm.
blowing up other Muslims.
Yeah,
Just it,
in a mosque.
but you know what? My granddaddy of all my favorite arguments is when
Mhm.
people say, "Oh, you guys, the jihadis are not that bad." I mean, half the time they're killing Muslims.
Yeah,
So you should like that. You should be
yeah,
in favor of that. Like somehow that's okay.
yeah. Like chaos in the Arab world is something I really am looking forward
Yeah,
to.
like I'm only like it actually is annoying
Yeah.
when Fox News they get up in a frenzy over Christians getting killed.
Hmm.
Like 300 Coptic Christians have been killed.
Yeah.
Like meanwhile, like hundreds of thousands of Muslims are being killed. I mean, that's not cool either.
Yeah, I know. I know. I mean, like again, it's not. It's the whole destabilization of the Middle East with the Arab Spring, especially, is just been an absolute disaster. And again, this is, people will blame Bush and the Iraq War, et cetera, but no, this is idiotic. Mostly, I think these people just have no clue about history, and they know is Bush and the Iraq War, and that's all they can relate to, and they don't know anything about the history of Sunni versus Shia or all these tribes. I mean, they know nothing about the composition of Jordan, for example, which is
Mhm.
essentially 77% Palestinian, and the rest is Hashemite, which is from Saudi Arabia, and I mean, and have been at each other's throats for a while. I mean, the kingdom is held by a Hashemite usurper in their eyes. So
So wait a minute. Wait a minute. 77% of Jordan is Palestinian.
yeah,
So
yeah.
is why is that not their state, or why did they not
Well,
consider that their state?
there's been several movements in Israel going back, 30 years to say, just say that Jordan is Palestine, because it was actually Transjordan, as drawn out by the powers that be during after World War I, was modern state of Israel plus all of Jordan. That was the accepted land of Palestine, and then with the story of Lawrence of Arabia, essentially. Uh, One of the brothers, the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, came up, essentially took over the Jordanian state, what became the Jordanian state, and said, "This is my land because you wouldn't give me anything in Saudi Arabia."
Mhm.
And the English said, "Okay." The British said, "Yeah, fine, that's fine," and Jews didn't really protest all that much because there's nothing much they could do about it. So and it was mostly Arab anyway. I mean, it was all, in fact, pretty much completely Arab.
Mhm.
So it just became the Kingdom of Jordan. Actually, it was the Kingdom of Transjordan for a while until it became the Kingdom of Jordan.
I love the fact that it's the kingdom of like I feel like this is medieval
Yeah,
times. I mean, it's like no, literally, there's a king.
yeah, yeah. Well, the thing is that I mean, I have, you know, there's a lot of people who dislike the King of Jordan who are on the Israeli side, but I actually have a modicum of respect for the guy because he's actually progressive, and not in a bad way. I mean, in a liberal, he's like a liberal guy. I don't know if you know this, he's actually a Trekkie, and
Is it?
he appeared on one of the Voyager episodes, like in a cameo appearance, because that
Oh,
was like
wow.
one of his lifelong dreams, and he in fact wants to build a Trek land, like a futuristic Trek land in Jordan. But the thing is, he is so progressive. I mean, he's liberally educated in the West, in Oxford, I believe. He has married to an American wife.
Yeah, but his wife annoyed me recently. She was the one that got
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
air and said that ISIS should just drop the first I out of their name because they're not Islamic.
yeah. I know, and I understand where they're coming from politically, but they really are ruling a kingdom of barbarians,
Hmm.
and they're trying to survive. I mean, it is not,
Wait a minute, who are the barbarians? The
the
77%?
Yeah, mostly. Well, more than that. I mean, most Jordanians do not see eye to eye with the beliefs of the king. If the king would make them completely public.
So is it like a military dictatorship or what's going on?
Essentially, it's more of an enlightened dictatorship. But Jordan is one of the only countries that didn't actually suffer through the Arab Spring. He took immediate steps to placate them in a very intelligent and strategic way, and he has not suffered any real loss of power, and he has not suffered any real turmoil. I mean, there were a few protests, etc., but nothing major.
But
Um,
also, he's been playing ball with America. I mean, they're allies of ours, right?
Yes, Jordan has always been essentially an ally of America. They are a key position. I mean, most people don't talk about Jordan, but they really are a key position. And Jordan, the upper echelons of Jordan have always had close ties with Israel. Even during the 1967 war, when Israel warned Jordan not to attack, the king eventually capitulated to his Arab, brothers,
Hmm.
um, and attacked because he saw he had no other choice. He was
Right.
threatened into it essentially.
Hmm.
Um, but had he had his druthers, I mean, his grandfather famously tried to make peace with Israel and was assassinated on the steps of the mosque in Jerusalem
Oh,
by a
Jesus.
Palestinian radical. So the upper echelons of the Jordanian kingdom have always had ties with Israel, and frankly, while their country is completely anti-Semitic, and I mentioned this the other day,
Mm.
yesterday, was a great article about Jews in Jordan hiding their identity. It's on Times of Israel. I'll send you the link later. It's a
Mhm.
good read. But most of the population is completely anti-Semitic, completely anti-Israel. But it does not hold true for the king and his immediate
Oh,
surroundings.
well, that's good. Who was Sirhan Sirhan? Was he Palestinian?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and he killed. He assassinated essentially in the name of the Palestinian people for the Palestinian state.
What was Bobby Kennedy doing with Israel?
I don't remember exactly what his reasons were, but
Uh-huh.
the Kennedys had always been, essentially supportive of Israel
Huh.
until like the last decade or so when the Democrats turned on Israel, essentially.
Okay.
Um, yeah, but
Okay.
essentially they were all kind of pro-Israel. I think he just was trying to make a statement that was worldwide about
Okay.
Palestinian resistance. Although I'm not an expert in the case in any way whatsoever, but I'm sure I could look it up.
Yeah. So just a quick thought experiment. If the military power of Israel and Hamas switched hands, what would the first month look like? What would happen?
Oh, you mean if Hamas took control?
If they had all of the weapons that Israel has, so if you
I
just
think
flicked
yeah,
a switch,
there would be a genocide.
they,
Absolutely.
they would absolutely green light a military invasion and just instantly wipe them out.
Oh, I think that goes without saying.
Hmm.
Who would actually go to war over Israel? I mean, America. I don't think that they really practically could do it.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, if Hamas had all this power, so they have all the tanks, they got the air force, they got everything Israel has now, in this scenario. But they know that if they do attack Israel, America attacks them. Would they still attack Israel?
Yes, I think they would. I don't think America would attack Israel. Ironically, I think that the people that would attack the Hamas in that case would be the Egyptians, because the last thing they want is the Hamas gaining an entire country on their border. I
So
mean, let
so
alone, just
so Israel would just watch a fight between Egypt and Hamas.
yeah. Well, they're watching one right now. So if Hamas got bigger, I don't see Egypt backing down. I'd see them ramping it up.
My favorite footage from the Arab Spring and the turmoil in Egypt was when the camels got brought in. So you
Yeah,
got these guys on camels and they're like whipping people and
yeah.
like I was like, what the hell? They still have camels?
Talk about medieval right there.
Yeah, it was amazing footage of those camels.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that quite well.
Does the
Yeah,
does
but people were, I remember people were just enthused by this Arab Spring,
I
as
know,
if
I
it was
know.
going to bring about some sort of peace all over the world, etc. I'm like, you have no idea what's about to hit you.
You're right. And you know what? You know who scurried away from there the fastest was the liberal media. They were
Yeah,
like, it
yeah,
was like, oh, this story didn't quite work out the way
yeah.
we wanted it to. It's
I mean,
like
look at
when,
what happened in Libya. They were all over the Libyan bombing and the
yeah,
taking down Gaddafi. Where have they been since then? You
no,
don't see it.
Tunisia is the worst of all now.
Yeah, it's just.
Tunisia is pumping guys into ISIS more than any other nation.
I know. I mean, well, I mean, they actually are trying to still struggling to make a modern society, etc. But the people on the street, yeah, they're going to ISIS in droves. It's
But
insane.
the thing is, it's like you're saying about the narrative. I mean, once somebody has their narrative, it's like in South Africa when it was apartheid is the boogeyman, apartheid, it's the white people,
Yeah,
it's the British.
yeah,
All you have to do is give, Mandela, let's let them have their own flag, new country.
yeah,
And then basically the story is over. They
yeah.
don't want to hear about the disaster that has occurred since that
Absolutely.
transition of power and
Yeah,
the absolute cliff that that country has fallen off into.
absolutely.
They're gone. They packed up the cameras. It's over. The white people were the bad guys.
Yeah, it was kind of a shock to a lot of people when what's his name, the runner, who killed his girlfriend. I forget.
Yeah, yeah. The Blade
Uh,
Runner.
Yeah, when they were hearing that how terribly violent South Africa had become, it was just somehow of a shock to them. I'm like, no, I've been following this for quite a
Oh,
while. Believe me.
there's so many murders in those districts. My family comes from South Africa. My middle name is actually in Zulu. It's
Oh,
it's Kunjan. It means how are you in Zulu. And my dad was born in Durban. And oh my God, there was a news story there recently where there's some xenophobia happening. And it's
yeah,
fascinating to me that this story will not be covered by the
yeah,
Young Turks or anybody progressive
yeah,
because it is toxic because you have black Zulus
yeah,
who are against black Nigerians in
yeah,
South Africa, and it's all being controlled and kept under wraps by black cops
yeah,
in a
yeah.
black
And,
country.
and not only Nigerians, but like all the Asians, the Thai people, etc., who immigrated to South Africa.
Right.
It's
But the problem is there's no easy scapegoat here. So
right.
so a progressive can't come in there and blame Israel for
Yeah,
that. And they can't
yeah,
blame white people. So they're
right.
stuck. They're like, fuck, I'm not going to blame a Zulu guy. Shit, that sounds a little racist.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's just amazing to me how single-minded they are on the racism issue. As long as it's white racism, oh, they'll cover that. But as if it's any other kind of racism, no,
Well,
no, they won't touch that, and
Let
that
me
really does bug me.
let me ask you about racism within Israel. So I know that Israel has people from all different races. A lot of like Jews from Yemen came in there. Is there
Yeah.
is there a structure of racism within Israel?
I mean, yeah, like any other Western society, you have certain racist elements. There used to be a lot of racism between European Jews and Moroccan, Arab type of Jews.
Hmm.
Moroccans, Tunisians, Egyptians, etc. But that has really kind of dissipated over the last, I would say, 30 or 40 years because there have been a lot of mixed marriages. Now, a lot of people you meet in the street are actually, both from parents from, both sides, essentially.
Hmm.
So a lot of that has dissipated because there's been a lot of assimilation between the two groups. You
Hmm.
do have some racism, for example, towards the Ethiopians. They just had riots recently, a few weeks ago here, and the same kind of complaints that blacks did in America. I mean, not they weren't like shooting people in the back, but
Right,
yeah.
right. So
Um, you
So
know,
you, you having blonde hair and blue eyes, are you the master Jewish race?
well, yeah, I suppose so, but I don't consider myself to be entirely Jewish. So yeah, and
Does
I don't have a Zionist conspiracy
oh,
either. You know,
but you do think Hitler would approve of you more than other Jews?
well, if he knew I was Jewish, I'd be, as you once put it, I believe it was, concentration camp ready. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I don't look Jewish. You know,
Okay,
yeah.
interesting. Man, what a situation! What a mess it is down there. Well, that is my list of questions has been exhausted. But let me rack my brain here while I have you because this has been very fascinating to hear all
But
this.
this hasn't. This means I haven't been Jewish enough because if your list of questions has been exhausted, you by when you're done talking to me, you should have more questions than you began. You know, that's a very Jewish thing right there.
It keeps going on and on.
Absolutely.
Oh man. Well, I mean, I just did a 3 hour hangout. What was it, yesterday, right? And
Yeah.
no, in the age of the internet, where a 1 minute video is seen as
Mhm.
too long,
Yeah.
and I'm dropping 3 hour bombs on people.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's painful. But yeah, thank you, man. You are a gold mine of information here, and it's been very.
Well, thanks. Well, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna put you in touch. Maybe we can do another hangout. I have a friend, like I said, Gabrielle, who is actually Orthodox, but usually on the side of atheists in our hangouts,
Hmm,
in the atheist circles. He lives here in Israel. He's in the military,
mhm,
and he's really chill about his religion. Like he thinks that gay marriage should be legal, etc. So you might want to, and he's American too. So you might want to do a talk. He might have some different things. I mean, he usually sees almost completely eye to eye with me, but he has some interesting takes on religion and things that he's seen. So
mhm.
you might want to. He was also in the Gaza war.
Oh wow.
Yeah, he was.
Okay, yeah, that could be kind of fun. I have another random question. Are you familiar with a song called Kaddish?
You mean the prayer Kaddish or?
Yeah, there's a woman named Afra, I believe. She's a
Ah,
Yem
yeah. No, I see. I don't tend to listen to Israeli music, but yeah,
uh,
yeah, it sounds familiar. Yeah,
she's
yeah,
a Yemeni singer, and she
yeah.
sings this very beautiful song called Kaddish, which is, I guess, in the remembrance of all sorts of tragedy.
Well, Kaddish is what you say in remembrance of the dead.
Hmm.
When you do Kaddish, is called you're basically praying for the dead. You know,
Hmm.
after somebody dies, it says at the funeral, after the funeral, really. The part in the Bible where you wear sackcloth and ashes. That's doing. You don't really do that, but you tear you tear a suit. I believe you should ask Gabriel because he's a religious guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. I'll put you guys in touch and maybe we can do a hangout. He's a
So,
really
so when was the last time you went to a synagogue?
oh, you mean to pray or to take pictures? To
To ask for directions to Tel Aviv or something.
yeah, essentially. The last time I went to pray in a synagogue would have been what, like 1983 for my bar mitzvah.
Hmm.
Or
Okay, so let me ask you this: Is there a God?
no.
Nice. Correct. Correct.
I'm an anti-theist. You know, here I am drinking my whiskey. With talking to you about no. I'm a secularist. I'm a anti-theist, atheist.
Are you drinking Johnny Walker Black Label?
No, actually, I don't have any. I'm drinking Ardbeg Ugadale, which is really good. It's from Isla, very heavily peated whiskey, and
Mm,
I have some Kilchoman that I also happen to enjoy. And I'm getting a bottle of Freud in probably another week or two, I think.
awesome. Well, get your buzz on and shalom on that.
Thank you. I've always enjoyed good food, and whiskey falls into that category. So.
Yeah, I actually fell in love with Lebanese food. That stuff is
Oh yeah.
nectar of the gods. Really nice.
I grew up with a lot of Arab food because my grandmother, from my father's side, they came from Egypt, so they would make all the Egyptian dishes, etc. I grew up with a lot of that.
Mm, damn.
Yeah,
Yeah, that is an export. I mean, is that even possibility for the Palestinians to get a food industry going, or is that just wishful thinking?
you know, right now I think anything would be a step up.
Maybe if there's a if sales of rubble comes into play,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah, essentially.
sell that on eBay, like the way they did the Berlin Wall. Like, here's a little brick from the Berlin Wall.
I never heard that suggestion before, but that's a damn fine one.
I'm sure the progressives would buy it.
Oh man, you know,
This
I, they would idolize it, essentially pray to it,
They're
you
like,
know.
this is an actual rock that was thrown and ricocheted off an Israeli tank.
Yeah, you know, I mean,
100 bucks on eBay.
it's just insane. But anyway, yeah, I mean, well, we can talk. I'll bring Gavin in, and you can talk to him about his points of view. But like I said, he sees a lot eye to eye, and he's a religious guy, so it'll be enlightening to talk to him, I think.
Yeah, that definitely a different kind of conversation, but yeah,
Yeah,
fascinating too.
yeah.
Okay, man. Well, hey, pleasure doing business with you tonight.
You too,
Uh,
man. Yeah, it's 11 o'clock. I'm probably gonna go to sleep pretty soon. But it was awesome talking to you. Thank you very much. I do appreciate it.
yeah, we'll do it again.
And just make sure that your viewers don't kill me for monopolizing your time for 2 hours.
What the internet? The internet's a big place. This is a certain, this is come if you want to, and if you don't, then just drop a little hate message for me and leave.
I'm telling you, man, you could actually do a successful fatwa if you wanted.
Yeah, well, we won't reveal your address in Haifa, but
No, it's okay. It's pretty easy to find me anyway. They call me the
yeah,
American. They call me
plus,
Amerikansky here because it's
oh,
all
really?
Russian in my area. Yeah, yeah.
Well, your city's under attack anyway most of the time, so it
Yeah,
doesn't
there
matter.
you go. Anyway, man, thank you.
All right, man.
You have
Yeah,
a good evening, and
you too.
talk to you soon.
Okay, see ya.
Bye.